Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Future Tech podcast series. It's me, Charlie Sell, the Group MD of Arrows Group, where I'm interviewing tech leaders, thought leaders, senior people within our technology ecosystem, asking them a bit about their story, topical events that's happening right now within the industry that they're most passionate about, and of course, those ever important career advice snippets for our STEM listeners. So really happy to have Fred Streefland with me today. Fred is the Director of Cybersecurity for Hixvision. Hixvision is a global IoT manufacturer based in Amsterdam that is doing some really quite pioneering stuff. And Fred is with the business, making sure that obviously cyber being one of the most prevalent parts of the technology world right now is at the forefront of everything they do. So Fred, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, and we were just saying your background is actually it's the reception of the office, isn't it? It looks really
Absolutely,
smart.
absolutely. That's indeed the entrance of our office in Amsterdam area.
Yeah,
That's where we are located. It's the EMEA headquarters, so the headquarters for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and I'm responsible for the cybersecurity in that region. So.
Brilliant. Well, then let's start with there and let's find out a bit more about your story. How did you get into cyber in the first place?
Well, that's an interesting story, I think, because I started my career at the military academy in the Netherlands, the Air Force Academy, and I did that. That takes 4 years, and after that, I became an intelligence officer, intelligence and security, and I followed my career within the Air Force and the Military Intelligence Service until 2008. I was then positioned at the headquarters in Brussels, at the NATO headquarters in Brussels, when I was giving a presentation, and somebody from IBM came to me, and it was the managing director of IBM Europe, which I didn't know at that time. And he asked me if I was interested in moving over to the private sector. So quitting the Air Force and moving to IBM, which I did, and because I was curious. And basically, from day one, they did send me to some cybersecurity training in Israel. And I became a cybersecurity professional. So I want to call myself a cybersecurity professional. So I started to work in IBM in the software group. And after that, I had some various roles in various companies. And that was starting also in Accenture as a basically managing some consultants in cybersecurity space. Was also in the OT cybersecurity. And then I moved as a CISO to some companies. So I became a CISO, then I became a global CISO responsible for the IT security of a very large hosting company worldwide, responsible for 18 data centers, almost 100,000 servers.
Wow.
That were in our inventory, and I was responsible for the IT security. And then again, I became interested, and I was asked basically by Palo Alto Networks, which is a global cybersecurity company, to become their chief security officer for Northern East Europe, which I did. And that's what I did the last 3.5 years. And since about 1 year, I'm working now for Hixvision as their cybersecurity director for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So that's in a nutshell my career. And to answer your question, how did I get there? Well, basically by coincidence, I have to say.
Which I guess many of the best professions are like that, aren't they? Where you evolve and
and the fact is that since day one working in cybersecurity, and as I told you, it was 2008 when I was working in cybersecurity. However, I worked before in the Air Force and the intelligence service, and I also did a kind of data analytics. That's what you did in those days. But not so much with IT, but more with data analytics in general. So it was a coincidence that I started to work in the cybersecurity space. But on the other hand, I mean, I was already pre-selected for it, so to say.
yeah. And it's quite a common path, I think, isn't it, from the army and the armed forces into cyber? Because I suppose that you're used to dealing with super confidential information, mission critical information, and the trust and the ability to actually work to rules, I guess, is quite ingrained from day one.
Absolutely. And the words confidentiality, integrity, and availability, those are the basics for cybersecurity. I mean, that's also what you're working with in the armed forces. So and that is so there was not a lot of new things on the horizon from that perspective, but of course there were a lot of new things on the horizon from an IT security perspective. And I'm not a technical guy by heart and trade, but in the meantime I learned how to program, I learned how to hack. So you got to learn those things, but it's not necessary to have a good background. I think it would help, but it's not necessary.
Yeah, yeah, and I can see that very much. And so the Internet of Things is actually a really interesting area. It's such a growth area. And when we first met and you talked about Hikvision and obviously the how much it's an Internet of Things, even cameras are connected in the real world. How have you seen that develop over the years and the Internet of Things become?
Yeah, and it's still developing, as you already stated. It's growing enormously. And what I have seen in the last couple of years is that more and more devices are going to be connected to the internet. And most of the time, unfortunately, those devices are not made for security. They are made for doing a functionality and being very efficient and being very convenient. So most of those devices, they are made with the purpose of doing one thing, doing a functionality, being a sensor, doing a temperature sensoring or doing another sensoring. So they do something and they send that information towards the mother computer. To when I explain it very simple, and the mother computer sends some commands to that device, and that device is hooked up to the internet most of the time without any security in place. So that is a concern, and especially as you see right now, we are talking about more than 25 billion IoT devices connected to the internet, 25 billion, and it's growing to 50 billion in the next couple of years. So that is a serious challenge, and some of them are well protected, but not a lot of them are well protected. But yeah, to come back to my specialty, video cameras, well, they have to be secured by design, otherwise you won't connect them to a network. And most of the time, of course, you don't connect them directly to the internet, but some people do, and then you have a challenge, especially the household cameras, the cheap cameras that you buy from a website or a web shop, and you just hook them up, and they are not connected to the internet, or they are connected to the internet and they are not secured.
Yeah.
So, and then you have those issues that you see in the news.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess so much of this is unknown to the general public, isn't it? Because
Oh,
you know,
absolutely.
it's and when you're thinking about cyber then and the rise of it, and as you mentioned, going from was it 25 billion devices to 50 billion over the period of time, what do you think are the biggest challenges for companies and the industry and as a whole to make sure that cyber does stay prevalent?
Well, I think most the hardest part is the fact that as a security professional, you want to be in control, you want to stay in control, and you want to have full visibility on what's going on your corporate infrastructure. And your corporate infrastructure is constantly changing. And one of those changes is that addition of IoT devices. So it's hard because at one time you try to get full visibility. That's at least your aim. But on the other hand, that attack surface, we call it the attack surface for the bad guys, is growing and evolving. So, and that's exactly what the challenge is. That, and the bad guy is also getting more sophisticated. So it's very hard for professionals like me to make sure that you have complete visibility on everything what is connected to your IT infrastructure. And if you can imagine, I just take this as a very simple example. If you look into a hospital, well, in a hospital, there are thousands and perhaps 10,000s of IoT devices, MRI scanners, other medical devices, but also the elevator, the lights, the building management systems, the entrance control systems. A lot of things are hooked up to the IT network of this hospital. Well, how do you get into control in a hospital? And this is just a hospital, which is a building full of IoT devices. So you can imagine how complex this is, because on the other hand, the specialists, the doctors, they want to have the information, and they want to have, in this case, very sensitive information, medical records of patients. So how do you want to, on one hand, make sure that it's open for the specialists that have to get to that information, but on the other hand, it should also be closed against the malicious hackers. So, and that's one of the reasons why you see that in the healthcare industry, a lot of data breaches occur, because it is a challenge. It is very complex. But on the other hand, that also makes it very exciting. And that's also what you probably will see in my enthusiasm, that I like to take that challenge and to secure an organization, either if it's a hospital or an organization which I'm working in. It doesn't matter. Every organization is not simple anymore. It's complex, and the bad guys are getting more sophisticated, and the attack surface, as I told you, is evolving. So the challenge for us cybersecurity professionals is constantly increasing. But on the other hand, I mean, that's also part of the job, and it makes it fun. That's what I think.
And and I totally agree with you. You know, we spend a lot of our time talking about technology as an industry, and why is technology such a interesting industry? And it's because it's always evolving. There's always a new development language, or there's always a new functionality. But I totally agree with you. Cyber is leading the way on just how rapid it's evolving, and the bad actors of this world. And I think the other thing I've been, you know, speaking on a number of these podcasts, it's the biggest problem with cyber as well, is it's truly global. You do not need to, you can be attacked from anywhere in the world. There is no physical boundaries. So people who are becoming super advanced in a totally different continent can still target you and your business as we globalize. It's fascinating. And so when you're thinking about, because you know, a lot of our STEM listeners, and there's a lot of people who are looking at cyber as a profession and wondering, well, how many opportunities is it quite a closed profession, or is it a sector that is growing in demand? Where do you see the sector in terms of growth?
The sector is growing in demand, to answer that question directly, and also because the sector is so diverse. I always say it's so wide and so deep. There are so many aspects to cyber. There are so many domains to cyber that you basically can do a lot of things that you can choose your path within cyber. Just to give you an example, you can become a CISO, which then you are responsible, a Chief Information Security Officer. You can become responsible for the IT security, but also within that domain of IT security, cybersecurity, you can also become a security operation center analyst, or you can become an incident response analyst, or you can become a data protection officer. That's a little bit privacy, but there are so many possibilities inside the cybersecurity industry that it's you can choose your path, and it can go from left to right, top to bottom. There are so many ways that you can work yourself in. And also for myself, if I look back to my career, I've done a lot of things within the cyber domain. I did 2.5 years in the OT domain, in the operational technology. So the ICS SCADA, the industrial control systems. There I did some work as a CISO. I was a chief security officer, which I was an advisor to CISOs. So a salesperson, consultant, and now I'm working in this current job. So I've done also different things during my career, and so the career path of a cybersecurity professional, or whatever you want to call it, is very diverse, and that makes it also so much fun to work in this area. But you can specialize yourself as a threat researcher, for example. You can specialize yourself as a consultant in a security operating center. You can specialize yourself as a CISO. So there are so many ways that you can specialize yourself. And as an advice to the STEM graduates, just go do a job and learn and do that for a couple of years and then move to another domain. So I think a good way to learn is starting in a consultancy firm like Deloitte or KPMG or Accenture, or start as an analyst in a security operating center, or work as a junior analyst in a security vendor. So there are so many ways that you can start your cybersecurity career. And I always would advise learn on the job, because that's the best way to learn it. And don't learn it from the books. I mean, there are cybersecurity courses like a CISP, a CISSP, a CISM. They are nice, but it's you have to be good at multiple choice. I mean, but the real work you learn on the job. And I learned the most when I was a CISO and I got a serious cybersecurity incident. When the CEO called me at 3:00 at night, I had to come to the office, and it took me 2 days and nights to solve this issue together with a team. But I learned so much from this cybersecurity incident that is helpful for the rest of my career.
Yeah.
I also provided and I developed a red team, blue team training for ICS SCADA. And was it my specialty? No, it wasn't. But afterwards, it became a specialty because I know more than other people in this field. So I think, and the best advice for me to STEM graduates is that, well, start a job and learn on the job and ask questions. Another thing which I always say to my colleagues is go to a developer and just ask this developer, ask him or her, well, can I watch what you're doing? How do you program code? How do you work in a cloud? How do you work? And just ask questions. You don't have to be a programmer yourself, but because I did that for 1 day, I know how Python works as a program language. I know how a web application works. I know how you can put an instance in the cloud with Chef and Puppet and all those tools that the developers have. So, and it's not my specialty, and I will never become a cyber tech nerd, but it is just learning on the job. And I think that's the best advice that I can give to young people that want to go in the cybersecurity space. And I think it is the most interesting domain for work. Yeah. And they also pay well. So that's also the advantage.
Yeah. Well, when things are most in demand.
Because there's a shortage.
Yeah.
There's a shortage of skilled people. And but earn those skills. That's what I would suggest. Earn those skills by talking to people, listening to old people like me, but also but listen to experienced people, and I think that's the way to learn it. And I still don't know everything. I still have to learn a lot of things because the cybersecurity domain, as I told you, is evolving constantly. I'm now getting into the IoT cybersecurity space. I'm learning more about machine learning. I'm learning more about artificial intelligence. But there's so much to learn, which is great.
Yeah. And
long story.
But what a, you can see from how for those listening, how you speak about it, and those watching, it's so clear that there's a passion there, and it's fueled because you're learning all the time. And
Absolutely.
and it's interesting what you said about advice in regards to start with a consultancy or with a vendor, and learn, because I guess one of the things that I've seen in the market is as cyber becomes more and more prevalent, I see a lot of our end clients, a lot of the end customers now investing in cyber, and there seems to be this debate of, do we want to outsource it to a vendor, or actually is it so important as part of our tech stack and our technology roadmap that actually we want to bring it in-house, and we should build our own cyber teams where we have full control? Do you have a view on where that where the future is going there?
Absolutely. And the answer to this is it depends. It depends on which functionality you want to outsource and which functionality you want to do yourself. But it all starts, I think, with a very good and experienced, in this case, CISO, or somebody who is responsible for the IT security in the company, because he or she should set the strategy. And within the strategy, and I think, and I always say, the strategy is based on a risk assessment. So it's very simple. If you start in a company, you always look at, I am a cybersecurity professional, so I'm here to support the business. That's my job. I'm not here because I like cybersecurity. I'm here to support the business. So I always say cybersecurity is mitigating the risks so that the business can do its business. That's where you are here on Earth. So, and if you look at it from that perspective, the first thing you're going to do is to take a look at what are the risks. And if you look at the risks, how can I mitigate the risks? And some of the risks you can mitigate by building your own team, but some of the risks you can mitigate by outsourcing this functionality or hiring a company who's doing this mitigation. So you always have to take a look at the whole picture, the complete picture, take an overarching look and say, these are the risks, this is how I'm going to mitigate it. And if I want to mitigate this in time, I need a team of 3 or 4 people. And if this functionality, for example, a SOC is a very good example, Security Operating Center. A lot of companies and organizations, they don't have the people in place, they don't have the expertise to build their own SOC. So SOC, a Security Operating Center, is a functionality that is most of the time is outsourced, because there are companies that are specialized in providing managed security services. So although, or if you are a very large company, a global company, you can build your own SOC and you have the people and you have the money and you want to invest in it. Of course, that is always better than outsource it. But on the other hand, take a look at the pros and the cons.
Yeah.
Outsourcing cybersecurity functionalities, well, sometimes it's better to outsource it, but sometimes you want to stay in control. So again, it depends, but it starts with setting a good strategy. And this strategy tells you some of the things you have to outsource and some of the things you don't have to outsource. So that's basically what you see. So and that is how I always tell the story, is that make sure that you have a good plan. And if you have a good plan, make sure that you have a good roadmap and communicate this roadmap to the board of directors. Because again, you are there to mitigate the risks. And the risks are diverse. And your security roadmap is diverse. That's why cybersecurity is diverse. So, and that's, I think, how you should do it. And again, coming back to the advice to the graduates, again, there are so many entrance points or access points to get into that cybersecurity plan, strategy, roadmap, and that is why it makes this industry so interesting.
And again, all of those points just make clear sense, because if I was to summarize what I took for the advice for STEM grads, that really interesting bit of spend a couple of years learning with a company and learn on the job, really embrace the fact, speak to developers, deep dive into the challenges, even push yourself to learn some code so you can understand the complexities of what you're trying to protect. And then, as you say, the be willing to try different things within cyber, because there's so many different ways you could go. So build that balance up. And so,
and very important, sorry to interrupt, but very important to know at the end is once you are a cybersecurity professional, you need to understand the business, because at the end you are there for the business. You are a business enabler and not a business obstructor. And that is key. And a lot of people in the cybersecurity, they come from an IT perspective and they are used to put a firewall in and block things. No, it's the other way around. You have to listen to the business. What does the business need? Let's make it happen.
Yeah, and that is a really valid point. You know, if out of all of the parts of a business, cyber is the one that has to put the business first rather than any other factor. So, last point then, is there one last piece of advice you would give any of our listeners who are wanting to get into cyber, how they can separate themselves from the crowd, or what they can do in their final years of study to really put them at the top of the pile when wanting to get into the industry?
Well, the advice that I also learned on the job is be a criticaster. Don't take things for granted. Don't assume anything. I'm a zero trust evangelist, so I never trust anything in my network, in my organization. And ask questions. Be a devil's advocate. Ask questions, because that's the only way how to improve yourself. Be a criticaster to yourself and be a criticaster to others, and ask those questions. Why are you doing this? Do you have full visibility? How do you know what's happening in your network? So ask those questions and be a criticaster. And that's, I think, the best advice that I have. So if I will become a CISO in the future, the first thing I'm going to ask, or first thing I'm going to do, is ask questions. And just because that makes you more knowledgeable, and also then you know what to do. So that would be my advice. People can always contact me if they want to have more advices. I'm always willing to tell some nice anecdotes. But also, I mean, learn from people like me. Learn from experienced cybersecurity professionals. I think that would be my final advice. I hope it's helpful.
Yeah, well, Fred, as I said, thank you, because I think, and for that offer, that kind offer, you know, again, for our listeners, you know, with our landing page and what we do on LinkedIn, there is always an opportunity for people to reach out, because it really is about learning off others, and I call it pay it forward. And so that offer is greatly appreciated. And you know, let's to bring the podcast to a close. I think that's just been some really, really insightful information. And as I say, the key points you've covered, it is so clear cyber is evolving, and it's so clear that, you know, it's an industry that is only going to keep progressing. So for a lot of our listeners, when you're thinking about your career options, you know, it's definitely one to consider and look into as it's future proof. If you're willing to continually learn, ask questions, and evolve, you will forever have a career, as it will never stand still, which as we said earlier, is in one hand is a bad thing, because there's always going to be smarter and cleverer people on the bad side.
Absolutely.
So it's always going to need cleverer and smarter people on the good side.
There are times that you don't sleep because you have to work. That is the other side of the medal, but on the other hand, it's a lot of fun.
Reward. Well, Fred, thank you so much for your time. That's been really, really good. And for all of our listeners, everyone, that's another episode of our Future Tech podcast series. The podcast is posted on our landing page, arrowspodcasts.com. It's also on the career portals of our 16 partner universities and on our Spotify channel. So I hope you've all enjoyed it. This is another episode of the podcast series. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Future Tech with Charlie Sell, a podcast from Arrows Group Global. Please subscribe to this podcast so that you never miss an episode. Arrows Group is a global technology recruitment and workforce solutions provider who focus on people at the heart of all our interactions. With in-depth technology expertise and global candidate communities, we offer bespoke solutions to every client and candidate. To find out more, visit arrowsgroup.com.